News with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. You know the budget that's happening next week, and we're all waiting for agog with worry and excitement. Well, relax everyone, because it happened earlier on today. All right, not quite the whole thing, but we got a broad glimpse of it. Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, asking on behalf of Speculation Nation, suggested the Chancellor was going to freeze tax thresholds. Shrewd guess. That means the amount of money you need to earn at which you pay different rates of tax doesn't rise with inflation, and so you pay more. Now, some people call this a stealth tax because the headline rate hasn't gone up, but it isn't really stealthy. You will, I promise, notice. Last year, Rachel Reeves said she wouldn't do this because it would hurt working people, breaking the manifesto. But she is in a trilemma. She's Labour, so she doesn't want to cut public services, she doesn't want austerity. But the bond markets who control the cost of her borrowing worry that this Labour Party is unable to control public spending. And third, the economy simply isn't growing fast enough to plug the gap. Indeed, a lot of businesses blame Rachel Reeves for raising the cost of employing people. So, round and round it goes with no easy answers and no good news. Now, I've argued before the whole ritual of the budget actually slows down business growth and spooks too many people, and we should just get rid of it. But since we haven't, the calls are rising on all sides, openly from her opponents and behind their hands from her own MPs, for Rachel Reeves to be sacked. She's one of the most unpopular politicians in the country. So I know I am going to be unpopular when I say Rachel Reeves shouldn't go. She should not be sacked. We're far too quick to rush to demand firings in this country, as if dismissals are a kind of universal answer to all of our troubles, the neat conclusion to every bad news story. But by and large, they don't make anything better. Would Britain be wealthier, happier and more productive if, shall we say, Darren Jones or Pat McFadden was Chancellor? No offence to these gentlemen, but obviously not. Wouldn't it be wiser to let the current Chancellor learn? She has made mistakes, for sure, but so did almost every previous Chancellor, I think every single one of them, and they were left in place to become more powerful, more experienced and, frankly, better at the job. And so it should be with her, our first female Chancellor, today. Now, if you want to throw rotten fruit or vegetables in my direction, you know where to find me. I'm the one standing just behind Ian Dale. Next, to talk about the genuine dilemmas facing the Chancellor, let's turn to Lord Burns. Terry Burns, a former government chief economic advisor and permanent secretary at the Treasury. I wanted to know, did he think there was a lack of trust in the government amongst the bond markets?
Well, I think that is a real fear. They have seen, already some significant U-turns when it came to issues of public expenditure. We also have the commitments that have been made before the election in terms of which taxes would not be rising. So the scope for manoeuvre is narrow. And so we have this, what I find slightly bizarre position where a large majority is actually doesn't seem to be helping the government. It seems to be actually, in a way, creating problems because it's allowing groups of people to wish to take quite different positions.
Absolutely. And what did you make of the extraordinary fandango of having income tax rises, which would have broken the manifesto, quite clearly flagged by the Chancellor, and then a few days later, a leak saying, no, they're not going to happen at all? That was extraordinary.
Well, I think a huge mistake. I'm generally quite shocked by the number of leaks and briefings that have been going on. I don't think it helps the Chancellor. It gives a very poor impression of the budgetary process. It looks like dithering, and it's creating a lot of uncertainty. I sat through the preparation of some 20 budgets in the 1980s and 90s, and Budget Day is a big day for the Chancellor. It's their opportunity to present coherent story of what it is they're trying to achieve, to put together very often quite a complex package of measures, which mean that no individual measure takes the highlights, and different people are affected in different ways. And they often have the opportunity to pull a rabbit out of the hat towards the end. It's one of the things that they often try to do. And to trail all of this just seems to me to be reducing really the scope for making a major impact on budget day, which is what you need to get the thing off to a flying start.
To be fair to the politicians, the Chancellor involved, I think that the intention had been to pull a rabbit out of the hat on budget day and say, and for that reason, I can announce that I am not going to raise income tax. But that was leaked. It was not their fault that it was leaked, but it was certainly a great embarrassment. What do you think about the economic argument around income tax? Because actually, there seems to me to be quite a strong argument that the mistake was to promise not to raise it in the first place, and that when we are in trouble, it's the easiest and fairest tax to raise.
It is. There are three big taxes. We have VAT, we have income tax, national insurance contribution. Income tax is income tax and VAT, can both do a big job. The problem about VAT is at this stage is that it puts upward pressure upon prices, of course, and government is very keen to get the inflation rate down. There are times that one just has to turn to income tax. It doesn't necessarily also have to all go up immediately. One of the things that I've watched chancellors do is to announce measures which came into effect gradually over the years ahead, which eased some of the pressure. But I think to write off income tax as a possible weapon, before even being in government, was not a wise thing to do, and it's created great problems because. We now need, seems to me, some decisive measures that can take some of this discussion off the table. We don't want, the combination of having made the promises on tax, the problems that is clearly being seen are trying to cut public expenditure, and having a set of budget rules which are very tightly constrained and don't really allow much room for anything to go wrong, has meant that we have this trail of discussion ahead of the budget, which really does not help. And we're going to have to go through this again next year and the year after. I sat through and watched, some chancellors make some quite decisive moves. 1981 budget, Ken Clarke and Roland Lamont in 1983. You want, when you get to this point, you really want to take this discussion off the table and have one shot at it, do something that is decisive, which then frees you up for a period.
In the Commons today, Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, was pretty clear that she thought that they would use a freeze on thresholds again to, in effect, raise income tax without actually raising the rate. That seems to me quite likely. Governments of all stripes have used this in the past. It used to be called a stealth tax. What's your view of that as a tactic?
Well, it has the benefits that people don't notice it as much. It doesn't get as much publicity. But what, of course, it does is drag a lot of people who are on lower incomes into higher rates of marginal rates of tax. And, it may be stealth, but it can also in the end be quite dangerous. I mean, most of the chancellors I worked for were really quite keen to keep up those threshold levels. They wanted to widen the tax base. That's always been an ambition, but they also wanted to keep as many people out of the tax work as could be afforded. So I've not seen, I can't think back to when a period of maintaining those thresholds and not increasing them in line with inflation. I can't remember a period as long as this when this appears to be happening. Because it does drag more and more people into higher rates of tax. And it's not, because, you use the word stealth, but you might say, it's an attempt to try to get people not to notice what is happening. But I'm afraid...
And that won't work. You mentioned earlier chancellors there, Terry, who have... all chancellors make mistakes. This chancellor has made mistakes. But there's already, huge calls, sotto voce inside the Labour Party and from opponents, get rid of Rachel Reeves, sack Rachel Reeves. Is there not a case for allowing a chancellor to stay on and become experienced and learn from mistakes?
Absolutely. All chancellors make mistakes. I watch this time and time again. We all make mistakes. It's not just chancellors who make mistakes, and circumstances change. it gets difficult. It's a job that people really have to grow into. It's a job that it is only when you really get to know it, you get to know the processes, you can begin to build a backlog of things which you've looked at previously. You might want to come back to them, you might not. That all takes some learning. It all takes getting to grips with. And to judge people on a period of 15 months, whatever it is, really is not sensible at all. It's not that kind of job.
Really interesting. Lord Burns, Terry Burns, thanks so much for talking to LBC.
Thank you, Andrew.
So what of a reported rebellion brewing on the Labour backbenches against the Chancellor and the Prime Minister? Our political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, has been digging for us. Aggie, we read that 80 Tribune MPs are ready to take on the Prime Minister. Any truth in that?
Well, Andrew, I've spoken to a few Labour MPs who were there, and one senior Tribune MP, Louise Haigh, who was there, said leadership did not come up at the meeting that was described in the news overnight. It was attended by over 35 MPs, and she also told me it actually hasn't been discussed in any other Tribune meetings either. The meeting, though, did take place, and as I say, I've spoken to people who were there. It was standing room only, and what they were doing was talking about what they wanted the government to do in the budget, how they were going to influence the budget. And they want the government to do things to reduce child poverty. They want the 2-child benefit cap gone, which we do expect to happen in the budget. And they want to raise revenue from those with the broadest shoulders, taxing unearned income and wealth fairly. And
so there is an agenda there for the left they want to press. Now, there was a very interesting intervention from Clive Lewis, the Norwich MP, on the left of the party today. Just tell us about that.
That's right. So he today was asked on the BBC whether or not he would give up his seat for Andy Burnham, of course, the Mayor for Greater Manchester. He said, basically, yes. He said it's a question he's asked himself. And he said, if I'm going to sit here and say country before party, party before personal ambition, then yes, I have to say yes, don't I? Now, Andrew, I have spoken to Clive Lewis and put to him that he's caused a bit of drama. And he said, well, the drama's only arisen because of the chaotic conditions we are in. It was a hypothetical question and it was answered in that spirit. But he did go on to say it's hard to imagine the National Executive Committee allowing Andy Burnham to stand, let alone in his seat. And he also said the only person articulating a real vision at the moment is Andy Burnham.
Really, really interesting. Well, let's talk now to a Labour backbencher, not at the Tribune meeting, but on the left of the party, Rachel Maskell, the MP for York Central. You heard there from Aggie the kind of agenda the Tribune group would like the Chancellor to adopt. Do you agree with them?
Good evening. Yes, I do believe that's the case right across many of the backbenchers now. First of all, we need a story. This isn't just about managing the economy. It's about building that vision by which people can get behind so they know where their money is going to and why. And I think so far we haven't had that articulation. Obviously, over the last few weeks now, we've been having the briefings going on as to different policy asks, but we don't understand how that builds into the story about what this government is about and how it will deliver this into what will be very important elections in May.
I was sitting, listening intently at Prime Minister's questions. I noticed you were trying very hard to get in yourself. But the Prime Minister kept using phrases about a Labour budget and no return to austerity, which I think means that people with the higher, larger shoulders will be paying the price for it, and therefore mansion taxes and that kind of thing. Is that the sort of thing that you'd like to see?
Well, seeing a much more progressive economy, of course, will serve people who are really struggling with the cost of living at the moment. And that's why this kind of holding people back with freezing thresholds and a stealth tax really will be to a disadvantage of our communities. And I think that will be the breaking of government's agenda as opposed to progressing it. It may raise £8.3 billion, but that ultimately, if that isn't seen, and it won't be because of the trickle-down approach that doesn't work, then I think people will want to say, actually, how will we benefit? Everybody contributing because we are the economy in all that we do. But obviously, we want to ensure that that money is then going to be primed into things which will make a difference. And I think really interesting research has come out, for instance, when we look at things like the welfare bill, it correlates with the rise in the NHS waiting times. So that focus that we heard the Prime Minister mention today about getting those waiting times down, obviously the reports come out from the Public Accounts Committee today saying it's not coming down fast enough, but putting the focus on investment and things like that will make the difference.
You mentioned the Prime Minister there. I get the impression that talks of a sort of coup or move against him are to say the least, premature at the moment. But certainly a lot of people on your wing of the party look at Andy Burnham and say, there is the kind of person one day we would like to lead the party. So how do you react to Clive Lewis saying he might give him a way back into the Commons?
Clive's always after a headline, and I think he certainly achieved that today. But I think the serious point
York Central's not on offer.
York Central isn't on offer, but what I would say is that I think Andy can articulate a story, he connects with people, and I think it's going to be time, if the budget doesn't deliver not only the maths but the story, then I think people will be starting to say, who's the next leader? We've heard the rumblings already. It's gone a little quiet this week. It's obviously picking up again. And I think ultimately the Prime Minister needs to look in the mirror and say, do I have the skills at this particular time in our history to lead the Labour Party? And I think that's a particular reflection that needs to be taken.
And your answer from the mirror would be, sadly, no.
I would say Andy Burnham should be looking back and saying, I can.
I can. Rachel Maskell, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. It is International Men's Day today, and the government's published a men's health strategy to coincide with it. We'll be discussing that with one of the ministers in charge. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time now, 6:18.
Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:20. One of the great frustrations for Labour MPs at the moment is that a Labour Chancellor has to pay so much attention to the bond markets, those shadowy men and women who decide the price of government borrowing. So who are they, these so-called bond vigilantes? Will Dunn, the business editor of the New Statesman, has been hanging around in city banks and Mayfair fund managing offices to find out. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
I read in your piece, £300 million every single day is what we are paying in interest to these people.
We are, yeah. And the people, not just in the City of London or Mayfair, about a third of our debt is owned overseas. But yeah, I mean, they're all different kinds of buyers for our debt. But they have to have, the Labour government has to have much more of a focus on the opinions of these people about their policy. They're not really exercising political influence, but their decisions they make about how they price government debt, whether or not they buy it or sell it, they have huge political.
There was a detail in your piece which fascinated me, which is that you would expect them to be sitting around in offices with big screens from Bloomberg or whoever it might be, giving them financial news, but they're also watching the Parliament channel.
Very, very closely indeed. Yeah. So they kind of on one trading floor, they have half the screens are on financial news and half are on BBC Parliament all the time, and that's a recent development. So that has happened certainly within the last 10 years, probably within the last 5 years.
Fascinating. And Rachel Reeves, I'm sure, and Keir Starmer would say and have said, you have to stick with us because we are who the bond markets like and trust. But it's not quite that simple, is it?
Well, I mean, Rachel Reeves did say that on your show. I mean, she said, you said to her, what would be the reaction in financial markets if I left? Which really, the implication from that is, you've got to back me, otherwise this will all go Liz Truss, gilt yields will spike again. But what I've been hearing from actual market participants is that's not exactly the case. They're less interested in who is in charge, and they're more interested in whether or not the government can actually get things done.
So it's things like, we had Rachel Maskell sitting there just a moment ago, and it's things like the benefits rebellion, which she was involved in, that really worried them. In other words, they don't believe this Labour government can keep a control of public spending. Yeah,
when they see a government that has, come in with, 405 MPs when they won the election, and, they've now got a majority of, 169, something like that. So, if they're not able to push through legislation that consolidates their finances, then they're not in control of how much they're going to be borrowing in future. And that means they're not in control of the supply of bonds that they sell to the market. And that has implications for the prices.
So if these so-called vigilantes want really consistency and predictability above all else, then ideas like having a putsch against the Prime Minister, having a putsch against the Chancellor is not the kind of thing that would cheer them up.
No. While Reeves might not have the kind of support of the bond market that she implied, it's also the case that rebel MPs are getting very, very expensive. So there was another trader who I spoke to who showed me some analysis that they'd done that suggested that, the number of basis points of kind of risk premium that is added by each rebel MP. And they said over the course of the Parliament, those kind of roughly 100 rebel MPs rebelling on every time the government tries to consolidate its finances could cost £100 billion, so £1 billion per MP.
£1 billion per MP, there is a thought. And we're in a new situation, Will, because in the old days, a lot of this government debt, the so-called gilts, were held by pension funds and kind of long-term, stodgy, very, very small C conservative institutions. But these days, much more of the funds are held by smaller banks and by the asset managers you've been talking to.
Yeah, and hedge funds which might use debt to leverage the returns that they get, but which also makes their trading more volatile. More of them are overseas. And like you say, it's the kind of decline of really big defined benefit pension funds, and actually, in tandem with that, the rise of our own state spending on pensions, which means we've got a welfare bill that's going up, and we don't have those old institutions owning our debt.
Very quickly, do you think we're close to a Truss moment again?
I don't think it's quite that bad. That was really also the product of extreme recklessness, disregard for financial markets. What you see with Starmer and Reeves is perhaps over-regard for financial markets, and that the clumsiness you see, I think, is them attempting to roll the pitch for policy all the time because they're so frightened of a repeat Truss moment.
Powerful people out there who aren't quite as sinister as the reputation suggests. Well done. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now then, it's International Men's Day, and the government is launching the first ever men's health strategy. You might think this is cheerful stuff about workouts and long-distance running, but in fact it's a bit darker. It covers prostate cancer and suicide, one of the biggest killers of men under 50. The Department of Health says men can be less likely to seek help and more likely to suffer in silence, and this, combined with a higher propensity to smoke, drink, gamble and use drugs, means men's health is suffering. To talk about it and no other thises and that's, I'm joined by Stephen Kinnock, Minister of State for Health. Stephen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Can I start with the health strategy? So, of all the things that people are worried about, suicide seems to be something the government is talking about more than almost anything else.
It's such an important issue, and I think it's just utterly tragic that one of the biggest killers of men under the age of 50 is suicide. We've got to do something about that. I don't think all of the answers lie with the government, because by definition, some of this, I think, is cultural, and it's about how we get men to open up, to understand that being silent is not a sign of strength. We need to ensure that we go to men where they are, which is why I'm so excited about this partnership we have with the Premier League, where we're going to use the advertising hoardings at stadiums to advertise access to talking therapies, to the online mental health support tool that we have. There'll be mental health specialists in the stadia ready there to talk to men. There's also a programme for outreach to men who are middle-aged on suicide issues, and also about reaching harder to reach community groups.
But do you accept that you implied you do, that there's only so much a government can do? Because an awful lot of this is about changes in the job market and men losing their jobs, and it's about a sort of cultural feeling that men's role in families, role in society has changed dramatically, and a lot of people feeling unrooted. And in a sense, there's not much a government can do about that stuff.
We've got to work in partnership with the amazing community groups that are out there. There's a group called Men's Shed, which does fantastic work. I have one in my constituency. They do amazing work. I've got another group in my constituency called Mal's Marauders, and they go out walking. It's a group of friends, and it's really sort of blossomed into something special. In a sense,
this is what I'm saying. A lot of this comes from below.
Yes, absolutely.
This is not imposed from above.
Absolutely right. And the two initiatives, the 3 million initiative on harder to reach groups and the 3.6 million on middle-aged men, we're literally going into that with a blank sheet of paper. We're going to design those interventions in partnership with the groups that really know what works. This will never work if it's the government coming in and trying to impose things from the top down.
Let me ask you a little bit of politics, if you don't mind. Would you like to see Andy Burnham back in the House of Commons?
I think Andy Burnham's doing a great job as the mayor for Greater Manchester.
Is that no?
I think Andy Burnham's doing a great job as the mayor for Greater Manchester.
That is definitely no. Expanding on that a bit, I was just talking to Will Dunn here about the bond markets, and they don't want any lack of consistency. They're worried about the state of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and therefore, when you read and I think it's overcooked, this story, but that there's 80 or so Tribune MPs preparing to take on the Prime Minister, possibly the Chancellor as well. How do you feel about that?
I think what Will was saying about the bond markets is very interesting, and it demonstrates that Rachel Reeves's commitment to fiscal stability, to consolidate where we need to consolidate, to invest in productive assets where we need to do that. Those are absolutely the right policies. We've got to have that fiscal stability, because if we don't have that, we can't build everything else that we want to build in terms of rebuilding our public services, getting our NHS back on its feet. That's why we're seeing waiting lists drop by 230,000, the first drop for 15 years, 2,500 more GPs on the front line. We've got ambulance waiting times going down. None of that is possible without the decisions that Rachel Reeves took at the last budget to generate the revenue we need whilst retaining clear commitment to her fiscal rules.
You know as well as I do that there is turbulence at cabinet level and throughout the parliamentary party about the leadership of the party. Is this a moment for them to take a cold bath and calm down?
I think this stuff is noises off, Andrew. Frankly, we have got a very, very full inbox, fixing public services, getting the economy growing again, sorting out our industrial strategy. There's so much for us to get on and do so that we can make a real difference to the people of the lives out there that we were sent to Parliament to serve. And all of this tittle-tattle, it's a very unfortunate distraction, but it is in no way distracting the government from the task at hand.
But is the tittle or the tattle or the noises off becoming loud enough to actually cause real problems for the government and for its reputation in the markets and in the public?
Well, I think we've, of course, got the budget coming up very soon, and that's going to set out the priorities of the government, rebuilding our NHS, getting the cost of living down, getting our fiscal rules and our debt to the place where we need them to be. And those are going to be the priorities that the Chancellor sets out. What I think that clearly says is we've got real Labour principles and values underpinning the way in which we are managing the economy, the way in which we are doing policy in this country, the way in which we are fixing our public services. And in the end, you know, there are noises off, there are opinion polls, there are snapshots of a particular opinion or snapshots of a particular bit of the Westminster bubble at any given time. What matters is that people out there start to feel the benefits of the change that we are delivering. And I'm absolutely convinced that as we start, we're fixing the foundations, we're turning the tide. It does take time. I'm frustrated. I want it to happen faster.
These foundations take a long time to fix, haven't they?
Of course, everything needs to go further and faster, but that is what we're absolutely focused on delivering.
All right, Stephen Kinnock, thanks very much indeed for coming in. There was a stark warning from the Defence Secretary earlier today saying a Russian spy ship's on the edge of British waters. How significant is this story? We'll talk about that. But the time now, 6:31, and here is Amelia Cox with the news headlines.
An ex-Met police officer has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl and former partner as part of a
And on your smart speaker, just say, play LBC.
6:34. A Russian spy ship, the Yantar, is hovering on the edge of British waters north of Scotland, the Defence Secretary John Healey said today, giving a rare warning to Russia that we see you. He said it was a ship designed to gather intelligence and map Britain's undersea cables, which we rely very heavily on. A naval frigate and RAF planes have been used to monitor the vessel, and the Yantar's directed lasers at British pilots, which Healey called deeply dangerous. Let's talk now to our reporter, Joseph Draper, who attended the Defence Secretary's address this morning. Joseph, first of all, this ship, it's because of the cables that people are so worried, yes?
Absolutely. It's part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, so-called because they disguise themselves as fishing vessels, essentially. Their purpose, as you say, is to track our undersea cables, potentially to sabotage them in the event of a future war. That would cut off our electricity, perhaps our internet.
I think 97% or something, or 98% of our internet is carried by these cables.
Absolutely. It's the softer underbelly of the NATO alliance. Defence sources are very worried about these undersea cables, and the Defence Secretary John Healey today gave a very troubling update on that particular ship, the Yantar, which is currently, as you say, skirting the edges of the UK waters up in Scotland. This is the second time it's approached our coast this year. Crucially, though, Andrew, it's the first time it's actually shot lasers at RAF pilots. trying to blind them, to disorient them. Clearly, that's being seen as quite a serious escalation, understandably. And speaking to sources at the MOD after that speech this morning, they said it is actually heading into our territorial waters. Currently, it's just outside the 12-mile exclusion zone. As of their last intelligence update, it is heading into our territorial
that sounds
waters.
very worrying.
proper.
Any sense of what we would do if it did?
Well, interestingly, last time they were telling us that they actually raised a nuclear submarine just very close to it, just to let them know that we were watching. That appears to have scared them off a bit, although not for very long. That was back in January. They're now back in November. So clearly that hasn't worked in the long term. And this is troubling the Defence Secretary. It's troubling the Ministry of Defence, so much so, they told us today, they've changed the rules of engagement now with this ship, meaning they could take aggressive action more quickly. And the Defence Secretary warned Putin, we are ready if it heads south.
I have military options. I'm not going to lay those out because it would only make Putin wiser. The important thing for me is that we know what Putin is doing, and we develop the capabilities not just in the UK but working with allies as we have done before to deter those threats for the future.
Now, that news, Andrew, somewhat overshadowed what the Defence Secretary had actually planned to announce. 13 new munitions factories to be built.
Lots more explosive factories.
Exactly.
We'll come on to that in just one moment, Joseph. But I think I should go now to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander, to discuss the ship itself. Thank you very much indeed, Rear Admiral. This is, sounds, just from what we were hearing from Joseph there, a genuinely dangerous moment where things could go wrong very quickly.
Well, yes, this is a specialist intelligence ship. There's no denying it's built specifically to not only snoop on our underwater cables, but also to pick up signals intelligence and other electronic information from some of our major infrastructure military sites. It's interesting that they've used lasers to either dazzle or try and blind the pilots. That's something we saw in the Cold War. I used to fly missions myself, and we used to fly with an eye patch on one eye, just in case these things were used and we were blinded in the air. So it seems they're going back to their old tricks again. And so, yeah, they're getting very aggressive. The simple fact of life, Andrew, is they don't like us. We're supporting Ukraine, and they're doing everything short of war right now to show that they don't like us. And I can think they're going to escalate quite significantly the more we show our support for Ukraine. That's what it's down to, really.
We've talked a lot on this programme and elsewhere about these cables that we rely on so much. Is the truth that we have simply created a massive vulnerability for ourselves as a country by relying so much on undersea cables?
Very much so. But, Andrew, the same is true in space. We're giving space a big ignoring at the moment. We're going to have 38,000 satellites in low Earth orbit. And even now, China and Russia are deploying capabilities in space to interdict and interrupt those satellites. They're doing the same with the cables. I have to say, Andrew, I first brought this up in a book in 2014. I lent the book to members of the government, and 2 years later, Rishi Sunak wrote an article on it. So I've been warning about this for about 11 years now. And of course, as usual, if it's not within the electoral cycle, it gets a stiff ignoring. So we're coming to this very late, and we're playing catch up. I mean, the fact of life is, as Edward Snowden revealed, we have a capability ourselves to interdict and actually intercept messages in underwater cables. The Russians are trying to do the same. But it really relates to really being very upset about what we're doing with regard to Ukraine. And they're saying to us, if we could actually do something hostile, we'd do it. But we don't want to go to war with you right now because it involves NATO, it involves the United Kingdom. But actually, we should be under no illusions whatsoever. This is right at the bottom level of warfare. It's called grey zone warfare.
And it's really happening. Can I ask more generally, do we have the naval capabilities we're going to need going forward if, grey zone becomes, I don't know what the next zone up is, but it becomes more dangerous? Because John Healey was saying, we are investing a lot more in our defences, and that's true. But a lot of MPs think we're not doing nearly enough, nearly fast enough.
Andrew, that's absolutely right. I mean, you don't have to be an MP to notice that. We don't have the weapon stocks. We don't have the personnel. It's no good saying to a dictator, such as perhaps Hitler in 1929, we'll be ready for you in 1939, if that's okay. We need to get a Teuton, to tell you the truth. They have a lot of munitions. What people underestimate is that Putin has a lot of stuff that he's not using in Ukraine right now, which he's projecting into the Baltic area and also into his western military district. If you look at Kaliningrad, which is the old Königsberg, it's very heavily fortified. He's got a large stock of ballistic and cruise missiles, all of which can strike the United Kingdom. We have no air defences against that. So if he chooses to go down that route, he can. But in terms of the Navy, no, the Navy's not fit for purpose right now. It hasn't been, I'm afraid, all the time we were in Afghanistan and Iraq. Again, the government has been warned about this, but you know better than I do, Andrew, that the electoral cycle actually has a demand on MPs' lives, not the strategic interests of the United Kingdom.
Well, Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. You have ensured that I will sleep less easily tonight. Thanks a lot. Now then, with the Epstein files legislation now actually on President Trump's desk, American politicians are saying their country needs the same kind of reckoning that Britain has gone through with the resignation of Peter Mandelson as British ambassador and the stripping of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor of his titles. But perhaps the British reckoning isn't over yet. Let's hear now from Congressman Suhas Subramanyam of Virginia, who is on the Congress committee reviewing the Epstein files. Congressman, thank you very much indeed for joining me. What do you think has to happen with Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor?
Well, first, I want to see the President of the United States either sign this bill or release the files the Justice Department have. The reality is I don't have enough evidence or information about not just Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, but everyone involved with Jeffrey Epstein. I have what basically the public has right now, and we're still going through the Epstein estate. But I'll say that every time we seem to get a set of documents, Andrew's name seems to appear over and over again. It's clear that he had a close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. It's clear that he was involved in some way, and now we have a victim and perhaps others who have come forward and talked about him. So I just want to see the truth. And if Andrew has information, we want that as well, because the deadline for him to respond to my letter to him to come testify or talk to us is tomorrow.
It's pretty clear that he's not going to get on a plane immediately and fly to the States. Could he give evidence to you without actually physically being in the United States?
He could, yes, absolutely. I mean, we're flexible. We would be happy to work with him on different conditions under which he would talk to us. The one thing that I would want is for him to be testifying or talking to us under oath or some form of penalty of perjury, because he has been untruthful before. And so I don't want him to tell us things that are not true, because that's not helpful to the investigation. But what I do want to know is everything that he knows about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, how they were able to conduct this criminal enterprise, essentially, and what his involvement was.
Would it help to subpoena him?
We can't subpoena him because he's a foreign national, so we don't have the ability to compel him. The only way is if there was an actual criminal charge by law enforcement here in the United States, and then we would need to extradite him in that situation.
I was talking a couple of days ago to the author of a book about Jeffrey Epstein, who said that he thought there were a lot of very, very prominent names, as it were, buried in these files that could still come out. Is that your impression as well?
That's very much my impression. I mean, the victims have done so much already. Many of the victims know some of the names, but they don't want to be the target themselves. They don't want to be the ones that are under threat like they have been for so many years now. But what they want to do is help us find the names, help us find the evidence that will implicate them. So it's not just people throwing out names without any evidence. And so that's why it's important to get these documents. I'll say this, if Andrew doesn't talk to us, and if Trump continues to hide the Justice Department files, we still have the bank records that we've subpoenaed. From the latest is JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank. And so we're hoping to get those in the next 30 days. And the victim said that those bank records tell a compelling story about the criminal enterprise that Jeffrey Epstein ran. And then the second thing is the Epstein estate has more documents to share, more emails, more things that we saw this past week. And so we're going to continue to do that in a way that also protects the victims.
And it's quite possible that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is thinking about this, watching this, and is genuinely agonized about what to do next, genuinely thinking about it. What would your message be to him?
I would say come forward. I mean, we'll work with you on the conditions, but just come forward. Think about the victims and what they've been through as well and what they want out of this. They want people to suffer the consequences of having committed these terrible crimes. And so if he comes forward and at least helps us with our investigation, that could be one way of clearing his name.
Well, Congressman, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much for that. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor does still deny all of the allegations made against him, I should say. Up next, we're going to talk about what was an enormous night for Scottish football as they broke a nearly 30-year dry spell and are making their way to the Men's World Cup. Time now, 6:47.
Andrew Marr.
6:49. Now, let's talk about last night. Now, I'm not a football guy, and I'm not prepared to pretend that I am. But I am a Scot, and after Scotland's sensational performance at Hampden Park last night, 4-2 against Denmark through to the World Cup, and perhaps as important, in glorious style with art and beauty, even I had a lump in the throat. Being a Scotland supporter has, as an old man with a flag and a rugby match once told me, meant a lifetime of glorious defeats ahead. Well, maybe not now. To get some perspective, let's talk to the Scottish sports broadcaster Andrew Cotter, who went viral for commentating over footage of his dogs Olive and Mabel during COVID. He joined me to relive what was a huge night for any Scotland supporter.
It's interesting because I was watching it, but I had kind of taken my eyes away from it because, like all Scotland fans, you think when you get to 2-2, you know, when Denmark with 10 men score a score and equalise, you think, well, it's just going to be one of those tales again. So I kind of pretend that it wasn't
happen
there.
Next. Yeah.
I just sort of thought I'll pretend it's not there, and I'll just take a casual interest in it. And then when the third goal went in, obviously that was it, and the fourth was just icing on the cake. But it's strange because I grew up in a time where Scotland got to every World Cup final, and in fact, you know, 74 and 78, there were only 16 teams in the World Cup finals, and then they moved to, increased in 82 and increased again in 98, and they've increased again now. So that does make it slightly easier to get there, but it's still such a huge thing because that's the world stage. You know, the Football World Cup is the sporting world stage. Whatever you think about other sports, football is the common sport, so to be there is fantastic. Absolutely,
and it's been a long time coming. It's been a dreich period, I could say, for Scotland for a while, if that's not the right word to use. Just in terms of this historic perspective, put McTominay in the class of people like Archie Gemmill and Kenny Dalglish over the years. Is he one of the all-time greats already, do you think?
Well, I think he's getting there because of what he's done for Napoli as well. And, to take a side like that, that has such a great history, but an old history. You're going back to their last inspirational player in a great time was Maradona in the 80s when Maradona came over and played for Napoli. But for McTominay to go there and become an adopted son of that city, that sort of strange and magical and slightly chaotic and downtrodden
a wild city. It's kind of Glasgow on the Mediterranean almost. Yes,
it is a little bit. So, but for him to go there, he's already become one of a sort of beyond a cult Scottish figure. He has become a pivotal figure for Napoli, and in European football, he's become recognised. And then to score that goal after 3 minutes, that kind of goal, then that takes you to almost iconic status.
It was like one of those kind of 1960s schoolboy comics, wasn't it? The kind of the balletic kind of upside down
McRoy of the Rovers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it was like. That was what it was like. And as I say, I don't really understand very much about football, but McTominay was not such a huge star when he was in Manchester, was it? It was when he went to Napoli that it all changed.
No, it wasn't, and that sometimes happens with players that one manager doesn't recognise them, or as in his case, probably doesn't play them in quite the right position, and then you go to play for another big club under a different manager, totally different culture. And I think the fact is that he's embraced that culture as well. You know, you can't be homesick and wishing you were someone else. Sorry, Olive's barking in celebration at Scotland having qualified. So you're going to ask about the dogs, weren't you?
I was going to ask about whether you frightened Olive and Mabel by mistake when one of those goals went in.
Well, interestingly, Mabel does get absolutely terrified in any sporting celebration. So if there's a try scored or a match point at tennis, or last night when I shouted, you know, she thought that I was either attacking someone or being attacked, and that we were all in trouble. So Olive doesn't care so much, but Mabel, she took some calming down. Olive will take some calming down. Now, I don't know what she's talking about. She's just had her tea, so...
Well, give both of them our very, very best here at LBC. One final thought. What does this do for Scotland? I mean, just in terms of sort of the nation's sense of herself, I mean, it was clearly an extraordinary night at Hampden.
You know, it's interesting that, and it does actually do something. I mentioned the World Cup's been expanded, so getting there isn't quite the same achievement, but it is because of the time that's passed since the last reaching the World Cup in 1998. And actually, Scotland has, I'm generalising a bit here about my own country, but sometimes we feel a bit, we don't really belong there. We're an underachieving country, whereas actually we're an overachieving country. But I think, you know, when you get to the World Cup finals, and do it without going through the playoffs, it can give you a confidence that percolates and feeds down into other aspects of life, because you just walk a little bit taller. And I'm pleased for that reason. It sounds rather grand taking it to that level, but I think it does make that kind of difference.
Andrew, I think you're absolutely right. Many, many thanks for talking to us at LBC.
Thanks, Andrew. Cheers.
Ultra-processed food, such as ready meals, protein bars, fast foods, is harming every major organ system in the human body and poses a major threat to global health, according to the magazine The Lancet. 43 world experts have found strong links to overeating and bad nutrition and high exposure to harmful chemicals, all of which means, in due course, early death. But what exactly is it in these foods that so worries the doctors and scientists? Frederica Amati is the nutrition topic lead at Imperial College School, London, Faculty of Medicine. Frederica, thank you for joining me tonight. I'm kind of interested, I mean, we hear this phrase, highly processed food, but what is it exactly in the food that is causing the problem?
So there isn't one specific aspect of ultra-processed foods that is thought to be harmful. It's the combination of the way that it's created. They're industrially made foods with additives, emulsifiers, sweeteners, often all three combined. And the way to think about them is really this: there's very little intact or whole foods in them. So they're these combinations of chemicals that are made to look like and taste like food, but don't really qualify as whole foods. So the definition is a little bit tricky to explain, and there isn't one agreed definition, which makes this whole area quite tricky to navigate as a consumer.
So you're not getting, as it were, real foods. You're not getting grains, you're not getting natural protein, but you are getting a melange of chemicals, which therefore spread around the body. What is that? I said earlier on that the Lancet said that every major part of the body was affected by this. How does it damage organs?
So these studies are looking at the people that eat the most of these foods and comparing them to those that eat the least of these foods. So it's important to say that, because it doesn't mean that just having one protein bowl, having one breakfast cereal is going to damage all your organs. This is really about
a lifetime of eating. Yeah.
And a majority of your diet, right? So these foods have a variety of ways they act on our body. The first is that the food matrix, so the structure of the food, is completely destroyed. So oftentimes, if you take a bar or a cereal, you know, it might say it contains, it's like nut flavored, or it has like whole grains in it, but there's none of the structure of the actual nuts or the whole grains in the food. Now, this is important because when you destroy the food matrix, you know, you can chew them, swallow them, and eat much more quickly than you would if you ate the whole thing. So a classic example is if you tried to eat 100 grams of whole almonds compared to 100 grams of like an almond paste bar, much quicker to eat the destroyed food matrix paste bar.
Hence the overeating, I suppose.
Hence the overeating. Now, the overeating is also influenced by the hyperpalatability. These foods are manufactured for profit, so they are delicious, and you will eat more of them than you intended to. So you might not be that hungry, but before you know it, the whole packet of Pringles is gone.
Well, I've been there myself. Frederica, somebody walking into a supermarket on a budget without a lot of money, A, how do you avoid the foods that are going to cause the damage? And B, is it possible to eat healthily on a relatively low budget?
Really important question. So the biggest problem we have with the narrative around ultra-processed foods is that we're putting a lot of fear, especially to people who can't really afford the alternative or fresh whole food diet. So the way to try and think about this is that we have to try and help people to access healthy whole foods and teach them how to cook it and give them the resources too. So just fear doesn't work. There are some ultra-processed foods that have been found to be okay, like high-fiber cereals, higher-fiber breads. So trying to choose those for your family is better than not being able to buy any bread at all. And
Frederica, thank you very much. We all need to educate ourselves. Thank you so much for that. Now then, if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.